And welcome back to the Management and Leadership Tips Challenge. As promised, today's video is going to be about power and influence. And in today's video, we're going to do a deep dive into it. I did a short video on it yesterday, but today's going to be a deep dive. We're going to talk a little bit about the definitions of what power is and what influence is. So we'll start with those key definitions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 sources of management power and examples of each of those. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some real world case studies that we can leverage that can help us in the workplace in terms of better utilizing these particular power sources as managers. So let me go ahead and share my screen and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing is let's just review the definitions that I talked about in the other video. From a power standpoint, it is by definition the capacity to cause change and produce effects on others. And influence, in contrary to that, they go hand in hand, but the influence then is the measurement or degree of actual change that is observable in the target person or system related to their attitudes, beliefs, values, and behaviors. And if you think about that, that makes a lot of sense that power is the ability to influence or the ability to make change, and then influence is the degree in which that power was used to influence the change. I mean, at the end of the day, as managers, we're implementing and influencing every single day, trying to get people to perform their best so that we can meet organizational goals. The unique thing is from a power standpoint, people don't realize, but it is the single most important concept within the social sciences, and it's the most studied. So 5 sources of management power. The first one is expert power, which is power of knowledge. So as a manager, let's say you got promoted, but you used to be in an engineering role. Well, you take that expert power of whatever engineering field of study you were in with you into your management role. So all managers have some degree of expert power that they can leverage. The second source of power is referent power. And that is your interpersonal relationship. So any sort of power that you have in networking, any sort of friends that you have within your workplace, or just alignment of advocates that you might have within your workplace, you can leverage those interpersonal relationships with others to yield power. And that's what we refer to as referent power. The third source of power is legitimate power, which is your formal or official authority that is granted to you by your organization or the company that you work for, that you are a manager for. So there is legitimate power that comes with your role and your title, but how you yield that is very, very important. The fourth source of power for managers is reward power. And this is because as a manager, you have control over desired resources, such as extra headcount that might be needed to support another project. You also have access to their reviews. And so you have access to money and bonuses and things like that. You have access to move and train people in different positions. So all these are reward powers that managers can use to control their employees. In terms of coercive power, that's our fifth and final source of power. And that's the threat of force of punishment. So this is one we don't want to have to use, but it is something that comes with management, and coercive power can be used in emergency situations, but it should not be the first source of power as a manager. Let's take a look at some real world examples recently for each one of these types of powers. So let's take a look at expert power first. So an example of this recently might be a leader with extensive knowledge in artificial intelligence. He might leverage this expertise, or she might leverage this expertise to guide a team, developing new AI applications, offering insight and direction based on their technical understanding. So again, just using whatever expert power you might have, think about what that is. What are you an expert in? And use that in your management capabilities. Put that in your toolbox. Legitimate power, an example of that, a recent example of a CEO issuing a mandatory come back to office policy. So leveraging their position to set company-wide direction. This policy, despite potentially being unpopular with employees, is enforced because the CEO has the authority to make such decisions. So again, that's legitimate power. Reward power, an example of that might be a leader recently at Google. He had put out an article saying that he was going to incentivize heavily his sales team. So that would be a great example of a manager incentivizing high performance with a cash bonus. That would be some sort of reward power that you could use as a manager. Referent power. So a recent example of this would be a leader, Bill McAdis. He's the former chief revenue officer and chief marketing officer of Slack. Well, he blocked off time to check messages, allowing him uninterrupted time for focusing on work. This likely influences colleagues to adopt similar behavior. So leading by example with his referent power, he was able to institute a lot of change within Slack. Final one would be coercive power. As I mentioned, we don't want to use this unless we have to. And again, I'm just pulling things out of recent examples in the news. I'm not taking any sides at anything, but a recent example might be Elon Musk, who now owns Twitter. Musk has been criticized for using coercive approach, including implementing policies without team input, publicly shaming advertisers, and monitoring employee communications. Obviously, this approach, while potentially effective in the short term, if you have urgent issues in terms of leaks or quality issues that you're just trying to contain, coercive power could be useful short term, but long term, you're probably going to get some pushback and retaliation from some of the stakeholders.